so it is time now to take a look at some of the stories making headlines on this topic. And unfortunately, usually when we're looking for headlines, it takes me a little bit longer to find some, poor headline examples to call out. But unfortunately, this time, it was quite quick, actually.
Yeah, the worse the media is, the easier our job is.
Yeah, it was actually slightly depressing. But here we go. So first up is this from The Times. Disbelief at kind and gentle fiancé linked to murder of primary school teacher Morel Sturrock. By the way, David Yates, the kind and gentle fiancé this article is talking about, murdered his partner Morel. There are so many quotes that we could discuss in this article that focuses so much on the murderer's character. I'm just going to highlight a few quotes. Yates, the former frontman with the Glasgow heavy metal band Nocturne Wolf, gave up his dream of becoming a professional rock star to start a family. Dave was the human equivalent of a golden retriever. Friends of Yates insist he was utterly dedicated to his partner. I mean, why does the mainstream media feel the need to eulogize violent men?
I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Tell us.
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think there is a morbid curiosity around murder and people who kill. This headline is interesting because in one respect, it's important to understand that men who murder their partners are not monsters. They're not kind of fairy tale creatures who are so evil you could spot them a mile off. They are very manipulative. They are very charming. They are people who are able to manage people's perceptions of them outside the home in order to disguise their behavior inside the home. But the issue with this reporting is the way that it completely overlooks her entirely. It's all about him. And I think what I find really concerning is this willingness to abstract a killing from the context of a whole relationship. And every time journalists want to position these events as completely out of the blue, sporadic events that no one could have seen coming, how awful, shock, horror, it happens twice a week. It's not ever out of the blue. If you look into the context and character of a relationship, you will see patterns of coercion, jealousy, control. You will see a woman either about to leave or having already left. We also know that pregnancy is one of the biggest kind of triggers for escalation in domestic abuse. That's not just domestic homicide. We know that often, women say that they first experience a real escalation in control around their pregnancy. We know that. So why is none of this being reported?
Quite the literal opposite of what you were just saying about patterns is the narrative told to us in this article. There's active speculation that really toes the thin line of what is journalism anymore. This quote, they, referring to friends of Yates, are convinced he had acted while suffering from a psychotic episode. Others speculated that he may have suffered delusions after trying a new form of medication or stopping taking prescribed treatments. This is wild speculation on the cause of his violent actions. Speculation that drives toward this is out of the blue and couldn't possibly have been a pattern of behaviour or a pattern that society sees all the time.
You know what really gets me in this article is that it's all about him and his character. And then there's two measly little paragraphs at the end about Morel and who she was and what she did and how, she was a primary school teacher and how the school have reacted. Two little paragraphs right at the end. And I just thought it was so jarring and it was so horrendous. And as you mentioned before, dead women don't get right of reply. And on Media Storm, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that these marginalised and minority groups get their right of reply. And this article just fell into every single pitfall there could possibly, every single one we've discussed, it fell into. There was a line about how David Yates had been doing some voluntary work. How is that relevant? If not just to give sympathy towards him.
It's not relevant. And I think something...
To find voluntary work, who hasn't done some sort of voluntary work in their life?
It's true. And obviously the question is, where is morale in all of this? But what I will say about domestic abuse, going back to what is coercive control, is that it often does hide in plain sight. And one of the things that I will always tell people to look for in their friendship groups, in their relationships, is isolation, because abuse thrives in isolation. And the best way to isolate someone is by spending all of your time with them. So when you see couples, and we hear about couples who were, you know, always in each other's pockets, absolutely dedicated to each other, you know, the family were always seen out together, that's actually a really big red flag for me. Because did that woman have a separate world and sense of self outside of the relationship? Did he, you know, really getting underneath some of these romanticized narratives is so important to being able to spot what is a healthy dynamic. And ultimately, we don't know what happened between this couple. We will never know. We will never know what her experience was, what happened in the days and the hours preceding her death. But what we do know is that it's not men's mental health issues that cause them to kill women. There are plenty of men who really struggle with their mental health, and they do not murder their partners. We need to absolutely get rid of that myth, because it's so deeply unhelpful.
Also a quote that I read out at the beginning, which was how Dave was the human equivalent of a golden retriever. That was quoted from the Times, had quoted a close friend, no name, just their sources, a close friend. And as you mentioned before, that close friend may be entirely unfamiliar with their relationship, with the situation of their relationship, because if this abuse hides in plain sight, if we can't see this controlling behavior because it's not so obvious, it's not a bruise showing up on her skin, then how will this close friend even know? And you know,
right. And so by quoting this close friend's analysis as a credible source, the Times is feeding this idea that if you can't see it, it's not happening.
Exactly.
And also, I think her family might not have known, and as is often the case, you know, abusive partners can charm anyone. Natalie Hemming was murdered by her partner in 2016, and you know, her family have described her partner who murdered her as someone who could sell ice to Eskimos. He was that charming. And ultimately it's these, you know, charming, gentle, kind, couldn't do enough, pillar of the community people who are perfectly capable of murder, in the same way that professional athletes are capable of rape. We need to be able to see people in their full kind of humanity, but to look at the behaviors and to really interrogate the patterns that are going on here, if we have any hope of preventing these deaths from happening.
I mean, selling ice to Eskimos is an inherently manipulative thing to do.
True.
Yeah,
just
true.
to say.
Very true.
Shall we go on to our next headline?
Yes.
The second headline we want to look at today is from the Daily Mail. PC who could have stopped cousins is online porn star. So this article is about Samantha Lee, a former Metropolitan Police officer. Now, in March of this year, Wayne Couzens, who is the, at the time, serving police officer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered Sarah Everard, in March, he also pleaded guilty to 3 counts of indecent exposure, 2 of which happened at a McDonald's drive-thru. Now, allegedly, the Met Police failed to properly investigate evidence that it was him at the time. In particular, one officer, Samantha Lee, is facing disciplinary proceedings because of this. So, for example, CCTV showing the vehicle at the time of this incident was given to the Met, and they failed to identify that even he was a police officer. Lee is now facing a disciplinary hearing that could amount in dismissal, but the complication is she was previously actually suspended when the police found she had an OnlyFans account, and she resigned upon that suspension. So this is a complicated one because, yes, obviously the Met needs to face scrutiny if they didn't properly investigate evidence, but the way that the Mail has chosen to tell this story, it falls into a trap that actually we're going to look at because we have an episode on policing coming up where we speak to serving police officers about whether and why they think all these issues are so entrenched in the organization. Where it demonizes an individual rather than looking at institutional problems. But perhaps the most jarring thing is that in this story, they have chosen to demonize a woman for, in their words, being a porn star. Isn't there an argument that this story is essentially like, oh, hey, here's a man that, violently sexually assaulted and murdered a woman, but here's a woman who failed to catch him because she was too busy prostituting herself off. Like, what kind of culture around male violence against women does this create? Like, what kind of culture are we existing in right now that is the story being told?
I don't think that the Mel would have run this story if she didn't have an OnlyFans.
Right.
I think that's the hook on this. And I think, to me, it's not about, blaming a woman for his behavior, because she should have reported him. And ultimately, a culture of corruption within policing exists regardless of the officer's gender. But what this does is conflates sex work and indecent exposure. There's a tone and a theme of sex within this that completely deflects away from abuses of power, completely deflects away from the fact that indecent exposure is not motivated by, sexual desire. It's about power and control and humiliation, and it's an act of violence. I think it's just a very salacious article that does not do justice to the issue at hand.
And it's yeah, exactly. That is exactly it. And it's almost undermining her because she does sex work. I mean, there is a way of saying that OnlyFans is slightly relevant to the story because she was suspended for her OnlyFans account. But also then you have to ask yourself, is it necessary to splash her OnlyFans pictures across papers? Because it wasn't just the Mail that did that. Many other mainstream media outlets put up her OnlyFans pictures. Was that relevant?
I think often, with sexual assault, people hear sexual and they don't hear assault. And actually, we need to be focusing on an act of violence rather than anything to do with sex. It's really jarring that our cultural discourse on this is so behind.
Also, this little insert here, "we could have saved Sarah," I just thought was so...
What's that going to do to a family member reading that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's awful.
Janey Starling, thank you so much for joining us on Media Storm. Just before you go, do tell us where people can follow you, and do you have anything you want to plug?
I just want to plug Level Up's media guidelines, which are hinged around a 4-part acronym ADA: A for accuracy, I for images, D for dignity, and A for accountability. And ultimately, our guidelines are available online. If any journalists are listening, please do follow them. They're so easy to use and ultimately are a tool for better reporting, because better reporting will save women's lives. But yeah, visit www.welevelup.org. You can find the guidelines there. And if you're someone who's listening who really cares about this issue, we have a petition to the press regulator. Over 26,000 people have signed it, so you can add your name to the petition. And obviously, wherever you see articles like this, please just report them and complain to editors, because they do respond and they will change the article. But it will take all of us firefighting to push for that cultural change.